Hey, this is Don Duran with NSI Solutions. It's May 2021. It's been well over a year since we've been able to demo or really connect with any of our Seam Phantom customers. Recently, we had a local fabricator call us who's having trouble getting a straight seam, so we decided to invite him over and do a demo for him. We're going to try and answer all the most common questions we hear throughout the year and show you the correct technique to make a straight seam. The number one thing we hear, or not the number one, but a very common one, is my glide guide's not straight. It's never the case. Unless it's been stepped on or damaged in shipping or something, they're very straight. Before we get started, let's check out our own Seam Phantom. So this is a 13-year-old Seam Phantom right out of our shop. About once a year, we bring it over here, take it apart, clean it, replace anything that looks worn or needs to be replaced. But one of the things that's critical is that it's square. You want to use a well-used pad so you know it's completely flat, and a good square, and check and make sure it's square to the base of the Seam Phantom. This Seam Phantom is really square. You want to check this periodically throughout the life of your Seam Phantom, because as this rub plate wears, it'll tend to wear more on the back, tipping the Seam Phantom that way and causing an open seam on the bottom. Now, we like to start with our square. Some fabricators like to start with them very slightly open on the bottom so that the seam only touches at the top. To adjust this, if you do need to make an adjustment, your Seam Phantom kit includes these thin stainless steel washers. You remove these screws and you put the washers between the air adapter and the Seam Phantom. And we've shown this in some of our other videos also. On the air unit, you put them between the air adapter and the Seam Phantom. On the electric unit, you put them between the grinder and the Seam Phantom. If you put washers on the two bottom positions, that will change that angle by about 1/4 degree. You can put them on the bottom or the top, but occasionally people will put them on the sides to change how the Seam Phantom leads or drags in a seam. I like mine to drag a little bit so the front of the pad isn't digging in first, but it's really a matter of personal preference. I've used many Seam Phantoms at trade shows without having to worry about any of that. So let's head over to the shop and make a seam. So we still use wood templates, and we, on the seam, the part where the seam's going to be, like a lot of people think the gauge blocks should go over like that, but then you can only get your glide guide parallel to your saw cut, which is just eyeballed on the saw. So we take our templates, put down blue tape, line the template up with your job, and then cut the tape. Pretending this is a good template, I guess. Just grab something, cut the tape. And that would be where you want your seam. Then when you put the glide guide on, you put your gauge blocks on, and you would line those up to the tape. Yeah, and then when you clamp it, then you'll always have it on the line you want your seam. At least on the angle, right? It doesn't, you may not need to go as deep, but it'll be on the correct angle. guys been using, start out with the cup wheel. And I've put, now ours is old so you can see it, but a lot of new seam phantoms, it's hard to see when the wheels turn. So I put little whiteout marks on there so I can see when they're turning. Otherwise, sometimes when you're finishing it, it'll kind of lift up and slide down the stone and the wheels won't even be touching. So, with the cup wheel, it doesn't really matter how you hold it because you're not worried about straightness. You're only trying to get rid of the bottom material. Always use them wet, of course. Every now and then someone tries to use them dry and they get surprised what happens. So I always hold this hand like behind here and like that. And then when I'm doing a cup wheel, I tend to push here, but only with the cup wheel. When I'm doing the pads, I hold it here and I never push here. But for the cup wheel, we'll go ahead and want to use it kind of hard. So you can see you've created a pretty big undercut. The depth of that is kind of personal preference and what glues you're using. If you're using a really thin glue, you don't want to go so deep. You do want to go back past the biggest chip you're going to take out. But if it's a really thin glue like, I don't know, Kimi or some that run, you don't want to make such a big gap. But if you're using knife grade epoxy, well, you can make a really big gap. This is pretty smooth with stone. You know, this is quartz, obviously. With stone, it's going to be a little rougher, which is good. With this, sometimes we take, if it's really smooth, we'll take a blade and just kind of make ridges for the glue to grip onto. You want to stop before you blow through the front, and then that's about right. You don't want to leave a great big square here, because when you're dressing the seam, you'll have a hard time dressing that straight with everything else. So we normally start with the 150 grit. Your kit has a 60, but especially on something like this, you don't need it. We do the majority of everything with the 150, and then we just hit it a little bit with the 300. If you're doing something super fragile like Cosmos or recycled glass, you're gonna wanna do more with the 300, but the 150 works good. If you go to the 300 on a hard stone, it'll want to kind of ride up like it's polishing, and you'll have a hard time getting it flat, straight. So when you're dressing the pad, now your grip becomes more important. You don't want to press here because you'll move it in and out, and you don't want to really lean because you'll flex this. So the two mistakes that we see a lot are people kind of pause, rush through, pause, rush through, and you end up with like a high spot with two dog legs on the end. The other thing is if you sit and go like this is really short, and especially on the 6-foot guide, you're gonna see it going like this. So the trick is just to hold them together like that and just use this straight edge. With a brand new seam phantom, like I say, I usually put white out on the wheels so I can see they're spinning. And when the pads are brand new, they're not perfectly flat, and all of this is clean, so you'll see this kind of moving around when you're using it. That's why I usually just touch it like that, and that stops all of that. And you can hear when it's cutting, right? My partner runs it all the time like this while he's talking to people at a trade show and just does it with one hand. You don't need a lot of strength. This end will take a little bit more work because there's more stone. And then you just go in like, 1/8 of a turn. You check and make sure your wheels are turning and you're not pushing it out. So you can see it's, it was pretty good before, but there's a few little chips still you're going to want to get out. But it's that simple. I mean, one of the things you can do is without it running and make sure your wheels are turning, you can see that it's touching there and turning, but it's not touching, right? You can see how it turns sometimes. Those are kind of just tiny bit high spots. The other thing we do is we just take a 2-foot level and you can, put it on there and see if it's straight enough. Of course, this one we'd want to take it down some more to get rid of. Like there's a pretty good chip right there. And one thing I wanted to say is don't come off the end and every time. because there's a little bit of end play, and when you come off the end, it'll pop forward, and when you come back on, it'll make a little round. So you want to go to about the middle, you know, so the pad's still half on there. Still a little chip, but does that make sense? The biggest thing I see is people just rushing. They're like trying to do it and they're not really cutting the stone. That's the 150. Here's a 300. I don't do too much with the 300 because it tends to polish, and it's like I just kind of hone, get the last sharpness to it. It's touching all the way down. Pretty straight. The thing I find is if I'm not straight, don't keep fighting it with the 300. Just go back to the 150 and hit it, and it'll cut that right off. Right. This one seems to be just a tiny bit high in the middle, but I mean that's pretty straight. If you put two of those together with a light colored glue, no one will ever complain. Now, I didn't work it all the way down to my seam line just because I don't know, it's just a demo. There's I think I got that. There was a tiny chip right there. Yeah, I'm not seeing, it might be the tiniest little chip right there. I don't know. What do you think? Pretty good. So, does that help? I mean, yeah. Is that different than something you were doing, or?
No, we use it like hot water.
Hot water? Yeah, I wouldn't use the thing with the hot water is we've had this come up before. I think what happens is like when this edge gets hot, it starts like if it doesn't get hot evenly, especially in the winter. I know shops with nice owners let them use hot water in the winter when it's super, nice owner. Yeah, when it's super cold. But I don't know, just not hot. Maybe just warm, you know, a little bit warm. that's really the only thing I can think of with the hot water.
Okay.
And then a couple other things, if you're doing like a super fragile stone, like recycled glass, when you want to finish with the 300, when you come down, just back it up and then go down again. And that way you're kind of just dressing the final sharpness to it. If you back up on something like Cosmos, it'll knock out tiny little chips, or that's when it'll knock out the one piece of glass, right? So on the final passes, we do that. If we use a 6-foot guide, we'll take a board and clamp it on the other side, so that on a 6-foot guide, if somebody's pushing, or an 8-footer, you're not getting a bunch of flex. So this is probably the heaviest straight edge extrusion I can find, and still make it portable, right? Still have guys using on the driveways and stuff. So, hey guys, we just finished a demo/training session for one of our local fabricators. We tried to answer all his questions and then many questions we've gotten throughout the years and get them all in one video. If there's any other questions you'd like answers to, please put them in the comments below. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey. Okay, let's start again. Hey, what is it? What do I usually say? Start again.
Rolling.
Wait a minute. Rolling.